What drives a person to enter a stranger's home, walk into a bedroom, and fire a single shot at a sleeping teenager without taking a single item? Is it possible that the most dangerous predators are not those who are loud, but those who can stand in a room and watch you sleep without a trace of hesitation? In this video, we're going to take a look at the case that defies typical criminal logic, a case where the lack of motive in and itself, is the most significant psychological clue that we have. Welcome. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and this is my mental health analysis of the Rachel Hansen case. I will be focusing on the main mental health and psychological indicators while providing the backstory. I don't just talk about the crimes. I talk about the psychology behind the crimes and the mysteries that captivate us. I look beyond the facts of the case to understand the why of the crime. My analysis is based on my speculations. It's not a diagnosis of anyone involved in this case. On June 4, 2022, in a quiet suburb of Gilbert, Arizona, Rachel Hansen was asleep in her apartment. At approximately 2 o'clock in the morning, an unknown individual entered her home. There was no forced entry reported initially, which immediately raises a psychological question about the perpetrator's comfort level with the environment. If a person can enter a locked or seemingly secure space without struggle, does it suggest a pre-existing familiarity or a predatory patience that allowed them to wait for the perfect moment of vulnerability? Rachel called 911 herself, a detail that shows her incredible resilience even in her final moments. She told dispatchers that she had been shot by an unknown person while she was sleeping. She later succumbed to her injuries at the local hospital. What kind of psychological profile belongs to a killer who sees no financial gain, but instead seeks the ultimate control over a life in the most vulnerable state? From a mental health perspective, we look for red flags in behavior that lead up to such an extreme act. In this case, because the perpetrator remains unidentified, we have to look at the behavior of the entire crime itself to understand the mental health state. One of the most jarring psychological red flags is the pre-attack behavior that occurred just days before the murder. Reports indicate that 2 nights before she was killed, Rachel texted her fiancé about a strange occurrence. She woke up to see an unknown person opening her bedroom door and looking in on her. The person then closed the door and left the apartment without saying a word or taking anything. Why would a perpetrator choose to test their access to a victim before committing the final act? This behavior suggests a high level of predatory grooming of the environment. In psychology, we often see that offenders who engage in this type of voyeurism or prowling are seeking a sense of power or complete control. The act of watching someone sleep is an extreme violation of privacy and a display of total control. It suggests the perpetrator may have been struggling with the deep-seated issues of inadequacy, using the intrusion to feel superior to an unsuspecting victim. Could this have been a trial run for a person experiencing a break from reality, or someone fueled by a specific hidden obsession? The police report, which spans over 300 pages, it notes a maintenance worker later discovered the unit's locks had been changed. This detail is significant because it points to a potential breach in a safe space that we all require for mental health well-being. If the locks were changed or tampered with, it implies a level of premeditation that moves beyond the crime of passion. It suggests a cold, calculated mental state where the perpetrator is focused on the logistics of the crime rather than the emotional outburst. Does the ability to methodically plan an execution in a residential complex indicate a personality devoid of empathy, perhaps bordering on clinical lack of conscience? Rachel was a horse trainer and an animal lover. She was known for her kindness and her work with Rachel's Rescue, a nonprofit her family started to help animals. When we analyze victimology, we look at whether the victim's lifestyle put them at risk. Rachel lived a quiet life and was well liked. There were no obvious ties to high-risk activities. This makes the why even more haunting. In many unsolved cases, the psychological indicator we focus on is displaced aggression. This occurs when a perpetrator is angry at someone in their own life, but instead of confronting that person, they take their rage out on the surrogate, who represents what they hate or what they can never have. Was Rachel a target because she represented a sense of peace or success that the perpetrator felt they lacked? Another mental health red flag to consider is the organized versus disorganized nature of the offender. The killer entered, fired a single shot, and vanished without being caught on clear surveillance or leaving behind obvious forensic evidence. This suggests an organized offender. Psychologically, organized offenders are often socially competent, appear normal to their neighbors, and can even be charming. They plan their crimes and follow news coverage. They also often have a history of escalating behaviors, starting with smaller boundary violations like stalking or peeking into windows. How many people in our own lives are masking a darker, more predatory side behind a veneer of normalcy? The impact of this crime on the Gilbert community and Rachel's family is a study in the psychology of trauma. Her parents have spoken about the limbo of grief when no arrest has been made. The lack of closure creates a complicated grief where the mind cannot begin the healing process because the threat is still perceived as being out there. The perpetrator, if they're still in the area, likely experiences a psychological high from the news coverage and the community's fear. And the perpetrator watching the family's pleas for answers and feeling of a sense of continued dominance over them. We must also consider the behavioral clues left at the scene. Multiple people reported hearing yelling in the apartment around the time of the shooting. This suggests a confrontation. If the perpetrator was the same person who had peeked in on her nights before, the psychological dynamic changes. It moves from a silent predator to someone willing to engage in a verbal struggle. Does this indicate a shift from a voyeuristic urge to an explosive one? Oftentimes, a person with severe emotional dysregulation will snap when their fantasy of the victim is interrupted by the reality of the victim. It fights back. What happens in the mind of a killer when their perfect plan meets resistance? The investigation remains open, with the Gilbert Police Department releasing heavily redacted reports to the public. In the world of mental health, we look at the cooling off period. Most killers who commit such a specific targeted style murder do not just stop. They may move, they may change their patterns, or they may find a new target to fixate on, but they don't stop. The mental health indicator here is compulsion. If the motive was truly just the act of killing itself, the urge to repeat that power trip is often underlying. Could the person responsible be living a completely ordinary life today, perhaps even in the same city, hiding their compulsion in plain sight? Rachel's family has worked tirelessly to raise the reward, which currently sits at $20,000. They even hired a private investigator to keep the case alive. This shows the psychological shift from victim to advocate. But for the perpetrator, this increased attention often leads to one of two psychological states, paranoia or grandiosity. A paranoid offender might flee or become extremely reclusive. A grandiose offender might help with the investigation or stay close to the family to see what they know. Are the answers to this case held by someone who has been standing right in front of them the entire time? The police report details Rachel's recent job change and some of her own stressors before the event. It's an important note that a victim's personal life is never a cause for their own victimization, but it can sometimes impact how they perceive threats. If Rachel was already feeling stressed, the initial Prowler incident might have been dismissed as a misunderstanding to keep her peace of mind. This normalcy bias, the tendency to believe that things will function in the future the way they normally have, is a common psychological trait that predators exploit. How often do we ignore our gut feeling because our logical mind tells us that there must be a simple explanation? The mystery of why her locks were changed or how someone entered remains one of the most significant clues. If the perpetrator had access, we are looking at a much narrower psychological profile. This would imply a betrayal of trust. The mental health of a betrayal is different from that of a random attack. It involves a person who has integrated themselves into the victim's life, specifically to exploit them. The mental health red flag here is a deceptive integration. This is the ability to mirror the victim's needs or interests to gain access to their inner circle. Is it possible the person who pulled the trigger was someone Rachel once considered a friend or an acquaintance? Over 3 years have passed since that June morning. The case remains unsolved. The predator has over 1,000 days to live with what they did. From a clinical perspective, the longer a perpetrator goes without being caught, the more their cognitive distortions take over. They begin to justify the crime to themselves, or they block it out entirely. Some may even convince themselves that they didn't do it. But the leakage of their behavior, the small slips in conversations, the sudden changes in mood when the case is mentioned, always exist. What secret is someone in Gilbert, Arizona keeping behind a closed door tonight? The psychological impact of a stranger home invasion is one of the most profound fears in a human psyche. Our homes are our biological nest. When that nest is violated, the psychological damage extends to the entire community. People stop feeling safe. They stop trusting their neighbors. The predator of this crime didn't just kill Rachel. They attacked the collective mental health of an entire town. Is the person responsible aware of the ripple effect of their actions, or are they too consumed by their own internal darkness to care? Rachel's legacy continues through her rescue work. Her family's strength in the face of such an unsolvable mystery is a testament to the human spirit's ability to seek light in the darkest corners. But the question remains, what was the trigger for the killer? Was it a specific date, a specific rejection, or was it the culmination of years of untreated psychological red flags that finally boiled over? We look for answers in the why because the what is too painful to accept. The 19-year-old girl should have been safe in her own bed. The person who took that safety away carries a psychological profile of someone who values their own dark fantasies over a human life. They are someone who can look at a person while they sleep and feel nothing about the cold weight of a weapon. Is there someone you know whose behavior has shifted since June of 2022? Someone who became suddenly distant or unusually fixated on a specific story? Maybe watching this video right now causes some discomfort. The clues are often there, hidden in the micro behaviors of those around us. The way a person reacts to a news story, the way they talk about women or vulnerability, the way they handle their own anger. In the Rachel Hansen case, the answers may not be in a DNA database, but in the memory of someone who noticed a red flag and chose to stay silent. Will that person finally find the courage to speak up? This is one of those mystery cases. There are hundreds and thousands of cases like this where it goes unsolved. There's so many unanswered questions. Did Rachel know the perpetrator? What was going on with her relationship and her fiance? How does her fiance feel about this? Her whole family. It does have a ripple effect. Something like this. We have our locks on our door for a reason. Years ago, people left their doors unlocked because they felt safe. Not anymore. And that's the psychological impact that this has, not even just for the community. When we see stories like this, we think of our own neighborhoods. We want to make sure our doors are locked because you just never know. And that's the tragedy. Obviously, it's a tragedy for Rachel and her family, but it's also a tragedy for human in general. And the behavior and the mental illness and the psychological indicators of a person that can kill somebody in cold blood in their sleep, that suggests a person is very dangerous, and that person is probably still out there. So what did you think about this case? Were there any elements that stood out to you? If you want more mental health analysis of true crime stories like this one, be sure to subscribe for more. And if you found this case compelling, be sure to watch this next story. It will make you more aware of your surroundings. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.